Greetings and salutations, Dota fans. It's I, Badger, back for another session of Badger's Briefings. So last video, we went over the two teams in the losers semifinals, the Swedish team Liquid and the Chinese team Aster. The two teams that are in the winners finals have a much easier route to winning this tournament. They no longer have to worry about elimination with their first loss. And if they win out, they can win 2 series. Win winners finals and win grand finals. Just 2 series rather than 3. So the road is easier. That said, the road is still very difficult. The ending stages of TI, never an easy get. And we're going to go over Tundra and Secret, the two teams that are in the winners finals. So we start off with Tundra. Tundra have not been around Dota for that long. The organization's been in Dota for less than 2 years. The team made up of Skeeter, 9, 33, Saksa, and Snaking. That is the roster they have for this tournament. Really, the easiest player to go over in terms of longest tenure guy is Snaking. Snaking is the one non-European player in his team. He is American, and I just love to say this, but his career starts with Bottom Bottom. And I didn't make a video about Bottom Bottom one day. It's one of those teams where so many strands of Dota history just start with this Bottom Bottom team, and it's a different story whatsoever. Dignitas picks up the core of that team. They go to TI3. They get 9th place. Snaking then bounces around. This could be a theme of his career. He bounces around from team to team constantly. Ends up on the North American Rejects team, which later becomes Navi NA. They go to TI4. They end up 1 win short of being the prize money, because back then TI paid out to the top 14 teams. They got 15th. What can you do? They were 1 win away. They were 5-11. The 14th place team was 6-10. Unfortunate break there for Snaking, not being in the money. But, we're never done yet for Snaking. He then bounces around from different NA team to different NA team, and he's just constantly bouncing around. He's on something like a dozen different teams over the next 2 years. Eventually ends up with this Vici J Storm lineup that ends up going to TI8, and that ends up actually going fairly well. They end up placing in the top 8. They lose to Team Secret in the losers brackets. The core of that team runs it back, though under a different organization. They're now under the newbie NA/newbie roster. This time a little bit less lucky. They get a 9th place instead. At that point, then Snaking leaves, bounces around team to team, ends up on Cloud9 for a bit, ends up on Sad Boys for a bit. He's everywhere. This dude is literally everywhere. But in 2021, a big opportunity comes, because there's no longer bouncing around from NA team to NA team. He ends up crossing the Atlantic, making a big risk, and joining an interesting core of players over at Tundra Esports. Now, when he joins Tundra, there are 3 of the players that would be on this TI11 roster already there, being Skeeter, 9, and 33. Now, 33's story goes back a few years. He had been around as like a top offlane guy easily in 2017, even to the later parts of 2016. Dude's broodmother and his visage were just very, very scary. He played on the Planet Dog team that went to TI. They got picked up by Hellraisers, got last place. What can you do? Ends up leaving to join the Optic Gaming team with Pycats and PPD and Zai. They go to TI. They actually make top 8s. They end up losing in the losers bracket for 7th to 8th. Not a bad showing at all. That lineup ends up disbanding. He ends up moving over to the Ninjas in Pajamas banner. They go to TI again, get last place again. This is another last place at TI for 33. Very unfortunate at this point, but at that point he goes over to Alliance and doesn't stay on it for very long. Goes over, it actually takes a bit of a situation in terms of a break. He's on the roster for nearly a year, but ends up joining this Mud Golem stack a promising European stack that gets picked up by Tundra Gaming. Now on Mud Golems already are 9 and Skeeter. These two guys are interesting players in that they kind of been around like that tier 2, tier 3 of the European scene for a few years. Skeeter had a little bit more of a notable set of results. I mean, you look at Skeeter, and he played on a number of different teams that went to majors, but he had been on Penta, he had been on really early versions of Team Spirit, he had been on the European version of Infamous. He's on a number of different. He even played on Ninjas of Pajamas for a few months. They trialed him out, didn't work out. Ends up eventually heading on over to Crazy, and they were pretty alright for a bit, but then he ends up on Tundra at the beginning of 2021. Similar story with 9. He had been in the tier 2, tier 3 scene for years. He had been on Penta, also on Team Spirit, played on Business Associates for a bit. But he ends up also going to this Mud Golems team that then got picked up by Team Tundra, this Tundra esports roster. So we have the core of the team already that would become the modern Tundra. Completing this roster at the time is Fata. The long time, and I mean long time veteran of Team Fata. And they actually end up being decent. They're a promising team. They hope to end up making the TI10 in 2021, and they nearly do. They play the European qualifiers, and they were one game away from making it. They lose to OG in the grand finals of the qualifier, 3-2. Heartbreaking loss there. But Tundra, they run it back. They're not done yet. They're not going to just abandon everything. They're going to keep things going. Though they're not necessarily at the full roster yet, because Saxa was not available at the time. Saxa was a little bit busy. Speaking of Saxa, he has a very long Dota 2 career. I mean, Stakings is longer, but other than that, Saxa has the second longest career. He was on a number of really good teams, too. He'd gotten on a number of decent European stacks before Digital Chaos, but joined Digital Chaos, the European NA mixed stack, that actually ends up shocking the world by getting top 2 at TI6. People really didn't see that coming, but they actually shocked the world by doing so. They run through the losers bracket, go on a historical losers run, BEG and losers found end up winning to. They can't win forever. They lose to Wings in the grand finals of TI6. Saxa then bounces around for a bit, ends up keeping it going, joins a number of different teams, plays on. She ends up coaching for a while because his teams didn't end up making TI, but eventually he bounces back. He ends up on a number of teams that go to majors, get top 3 of majors, end up winning some of these majors. He won a minor, ended up being okay. And eventually he ends up on the NIP roster. This is after they had a rough time at TI. He leaves that NIP team, joins OG. OG, they were an alright team and they qualified for TI that year, the TI10 year. Ends up getting 7th to 8th at that TI. But at that point, that team's just done, pretty much. They're going to entirely retool this roster. No Tail's retiring, Seb's retiring, Sumeilo's out, Saxa's out. They're completely changing and mixing it up. So Saxa is a free agent for a little bit. Tundra, meanwhile, they're playing with the 4 that are currently there, other than Saxa, with Fata instead. And they actually play really well with this roster with Fata. And they actually end up playing this ESL 1 fall tournament. And they win it. They go to Dota Pits. And they win it. And they look extraordinarily good at these tournaments. It's like, wait a minute. This team we have here, this Tundra roster, might just be what we need to be an elite European team, perhaps even an elite global team. They go on to play in the Western European qualifiers for the first major that ended up being cancelled. They play in the regional finals, they end up getting 4th in the regional finals. A lot of people had them winning that regional finals, so a 4th place finish was disappointing. And they make this very risky move. They kick Fata from the team to pick up the free agent Saxa. And a lot of people said this is a heartless move. This is stone cold. How could you do this? Your team was very good. You won these 2 tournaments. You played well in the European first tour of the DPC. You still got, good placement in the regional qualifiers. But Tundra made a risk. I say maybe we think we're 1 player away from truly being a great team. Turns out, it seems like they were right. They end up going to ESL1 Stockholm, the second major, the first real major of the year. The first one that wasn't canceled, I should say. They get top 3. Good placement. And off that alone, on top of that, they end up winning the next tour of the DPC Online. They win Tour 3. From that, they pretty much guarantee a berth at TI11, the current TI. They bomb out at PGL, but at the PGL Arlington Major, but it doesn't really matter because they're guaranteed a slot in TI. They get invited to TI. And Tundra go in as not the favorite, but one of the higher regarded team. A team that a lot of people have, making top 4, making top 6, making top 8. Not many people had them winning TI. A lot of people had them playing well at TI. Group stage, they crush it. Tundra utterly and completely crush it in the group stage. They win their group, Group B, with a 14-4 record. They finished ahead of Team Secret in their group. In the bracket stage, they end up pummeling OG, getting vengeance for their loss at ESL Stockholm, the first real major of the year. They go into the winners semis. They play Aster. Once again, it's not as much of a bit of a beatdown there. They just win both of these series, pretty convincing fashion, 4-0 in playoffs, and that's how they got to this winners finals situation. On the other side are Team Secret. And Team Secret have been around in Dota for unlike Tundra, who's been in Dota for less than 2 years, Secret's been around for a long time. The organization was formed post TI4 as a bit of a European super team, more or less ran by Puppy, owned by some Turkish billionaire. And they had a billion different rosters over the years. The one constant has been Puppy. Puppy, I don't really need to explain Puppy that much. He has a strong case of being the greatest Dota 2 player ever. He's been a top player, at least a tier 2 player or better, for at least 15 years at this point. Because he was a very elite Dota 1 player in 2008, and it's now 2022. It's been a long time. He was one of the better European Dota 1 players in the late 2000s. Won TI1, got second at TI2, got second at TI3, top 8 at TI4. This is all pre-Secret. His career before Team Secret is still Hall of Fame worthy type stuff. Of course, at that point, he forms Team Secret, and the initial Team Secret is not that great. So they end up swapping the roster. They bring in Arteezy, they bring in Zai, they become the best team in the world. They then bomb out of TI5. They swap it up. They bring in Eternal Envy, they bring in Wii, they win a major, they go to TI, they bomb out again. And at that point, it seems like Puppy may have been on the way out as his top captain. It's you know what? At that point, he'd been a top captain for 8 years. A lot of the really talented players around him left him. He was left to kind of a threadbare roster. A lot of people kind of counted Secret out for the next calendar year. And Puppy turned a roster of relatively unheralded and younger guys, and a bunch of rejects mostly, into a good team. They actually go on to get 9th at TI7, which, again, is lower than a lot of Puppy's historical placements. But with the roster he had, you say, oh, wow. Well, Puppy has still got it. After that, he's able to start attracting, top talent again to his teams. And go to TI8, gets 5th place, goes to TI9, gets 4th place, goes to TI10, gets 3rd place. Puppy, turns out, very good captain, very good at Dota. He's the one constant with Secret, and as a result, Secret's been more or less constantly good. However, going into the 2021, 2022, this TI11 Dota season, one player who was tenured in the team with him was Nisha. Nisha was, Polish player, real young, played on like these all Polish like Singularity and Kingwin and Let's Do It stacks for years and years. And he gets noticed by Puppy. Puppy's like, you know what, Nisha, we are going to be good at Dota. You're good. I'm going to captain you up. I'm going to make you into the player you are going to become. He's been on Secret since for the last 4 years. During that time, he was with some of the aforementioned Puppy results, i.e. that 4th place at TI and that 3rd place at the other TI. He's won some majors. He's been an exceptional core player statistically during that time, playing both carry and mid. I know people that I talk to describe him as the best player in the world sometimes. This guy's really, really good at Dota. So, unsurprisingly, Puppy wants to keep this guy on his roster as much as possible, as hard as possible, as sure as, yes, this guy needs to be on my team, 100%. So, at this point, the Secret roster of like 6 months ago is entirely different. It's Nisha and Puppy, but it's not the roster we actually ended up getting. See, at the time on the team, they tried out some different stuff. They tried out some different players. They brought in Sumail. They brought in, They brought in Sumail. They had Yapsor still. They brought in Ice Ice Ice. This is a roster with some expectations of actually being, fairly decent. But they weren't decent. So over the year, they started to shuffle in different players because they failed to make it to either of the 2 majors. Secret had a rough calendar year at this point. They did not qualify for the European regional finals. They did not make the Stockholm major. They did not make the Arlington major. They did play in like the Riyadh Masters and ESL Malaysia, and they played pretty well there. They had some decent placings, top 4 placings to both of these tournaments, but obviously, it's the majors and especially TI that counts. So Puppy decides, all right, what can I do? Who can I bring in to be good on this team? There was one player who had been inactive for a bit, but had a very storied Dota career before that, and his name was Resolution. Still is Resolution, but I digress. Rezo has been really good for probably 8 years now. He's basically the star player of a number of these great Eastern European CIS type teams. He had been on Virtus Pro, and he had been on Roxkiss, and he had been on Empire. He was just basically the best player in those teams year in, year out. Or if not the best player on those teams, one of the better players in those teams year in, year out. Exceptional Dota 2 player. But eventually ends up leaving for this Digital Chaos team. And they end up shocking the world. They get 2nd place at that one. It's kind of like, let's throw together rosters, see what happens, and well, actually ends up working out for them. He gets 2nd at TI. You can't doubt it's a great placement. He ends up playing on like a number of different stacks again, back in Europe. He stands in for Team Empire TI7. Chappie had a visa issue. Rezo goes and stands in. Arguably a solid upgrade for the team. They end up making top 8s. And again, most people have them rated as one of the worst teams in the tournament, given they had a stand-in, they weren't necessarily that much of a high-profile team, but Rezo was able to uplift this team to being a top 8 unit. Then he goes and plays on like these BGJ Storm, Quincy Crew teams for a while, before Quinn really joined them. Was playing with like Yawar and MSS and those guys. Plays at TI8s, gets the top 8 placements, but then ends up off of those teams, goes and heads on back to Europe, plays in Virtus Pro again, plays in Hellraisers again, and in 2021, it seems like, now I'm taking a break. He said he would not be playing in this most recent DPC season, and he was correct. He did not play in the actual, DPC tours for the season. It seemed like he might have been done. But Secret gives him an offer. It's like, you know what? You gotta go reel him back in, get him back into the scene again. This is a Secret team that hopes to obviously make big moves. If you're Resolution, you've been playing against Puffy for years, you know how good of a captain he is. So he comes and joins the team. But at this point, we're still bringing in more players. We are not done bringing in players. One of the other players that gets brought in is a relatively interesting guy in Crystallis. Crystallis' pro career is very short. Started playing Pro Dota in 2020. Played on like these different European mixed stacks. Goes to Entity. And Entity actually looked really good in late 2021, early 2022. So much so that Secret come calling like ring, 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 ring. Oh, Crystallis, Mr. Entity Crystallis. You want to come join my team? You know, we're mixing it up. We're getting rid of Sumail. You want to come join? Maybe we'll do some good stuff together. And he says, sure. Leaves Entity, Pure replaces him. Entity actually become better, and initially Secret are playing fairly badly. Their first DPC tour with Crystallis is no different than their one before him. It's a rough time initially. So he's still in this roster, though. Last player that gets brought in is Zayats, the Kyrgyzstani player, who's been on basically every single different Eastern European organization you can think of. Played on Navi, played on Vega, played on Virtus Pro, went to a TI with Navi. Didn't go that well, but again, 13th is better than most players will ever do in their career, including me, of course, but I digress about that one. Puppy decides to say, you know what, this guy is kind of languishing around on Hydra, which was not really doing much of anything in the Eastern European scene. Let's bring this guy into Secret, take a risk, see what happens. So they go and they play the European qualifiers. This is kind of like a bit of a gambit, just kind of hoping they'll make it out. It's a very stacked European qualifier. Entity were the favorite for this one. Entity looked very good since Pure joined the team. Entity won the qualifier. But Secret do make it to the last chance qualifier. And again, it's a hard last chance qualifier to make it out of. They're considered one of the better teams at the last chance qualifier, but not everyone really considered them the best team. Like, people are considering Virtus Pro the absolute favorites. People at teams like Extreme Gaming and Vici Gaming and Liquid as teams that they rated more highly than Team Secret. Despite Secret literally beating Liquid in the European qualifier. They end up winning the last chance qualifier. They get first place in it. They're the 19th of 20 TI teams. And notice, considering Liquid also made it out and Liquid's also in the top 4, the 2 last chance qualifier teams are in the top 4 of the tournament. So maybe this is a good thing to see. But going into the actual TI stage, Secret are in the same group as Tundra. They're in that group B. They get second in group B. They go 13-5, second place. Good showing in the group stage. They're kind of on fire. They go into the bracket, and it seems like, well, Secret have a rough journey ahead of them. Because in their bracket, they have LGD, the favorite going into TI, and if they win that, they're expected to play Evil Geniuses, the best team of the group stage. So it's like, man, we played really well. We've had a really hard road to get here. Can't you just throw us a bone? No, LGD EG. Number one pre-tournament favorite, number one group stage team. About that later. So they play LGD. A lot of people had LGD winning this series. A lot of people still have LGD winning this tournament. Game 1, Secret pick Leshrac, smackdown, slaughter of a game. Not even a close game, 23-minute game. Game 2 is closer, but again, Secret pick a Leshrac, and they win a Dota 2 game, unsurprisingly. And they beat LGD 2-0. Big win right there. And then it turns out, you know who's not in the winner semis? Evil Geniuses. Number one group stage team. They're actually not there. They lost to Thunder Awaken. And Secret now play the highest placing South American team of all time. This is the first ever SA team to guarantee a top 6 placement. They play a close series with Thunder Awaken, but they kind of crush the Cinderella story a little bit. Say, even though Pakaz going into the series, I think at the number 1 stats, like GPM wise, of any carry. Secret say, you know what, we don't care. We're picking Marcy, we're picking Leshrac. That's. Notice 4 playoff games, 4 wins, 4 Leshrac games. But I digress. I mean, everyone's picking Leshrac for a reason. It's one of the best heroes in Dota right now. So at that point, we now have the 2 teams that have not lost, that are still in the bracket. That's our Tundra, that's our Team Secret. It's a good year for European Dota. And for both of these teams, there's a very strong argument for them being the best team in the tournament currently. I'm personally partial. I think Tundra is the best team right now, but I could hear an argument for Secret for sure. They're playing the winners finals quite soon. Winner of that one will obviously sit in Grands. For Secret, for a lot of these players, this is kind of a legacy-defining thing. I mean, Puppy, if Puppy wants to cement his case as the greatest player ever, this is a great way to do it. Because you have, ready for Puppy in terms of the GOAT case. It's a very strong GOAT case. If you had to ask, if you put a gun to my head, ask me, hey, who's the best player in Dota 2 history? I would probably tell you Puppy. But he only has one TI. There are players with 2 TIs. So a lot of Puppy's case is based on longevity. He's been more or less among the best for the longest of anybody. He's been among the best for 15 years. And during that time, he's won a TI. He has 2 more grand finals at TI, a few more top 4s at TI. He's won some majors. He's won some pre-major equivalent to majors. He's won a lot of stuff. But if he actually wins another TI, then suddenly his peak accomplishments are as good as anybody's. And he also has the longevity longer than anybody's. So winning this TI more or less cements his case, of a very strong case at that, for being the greatest player of all time. So for Puppy, this is your legacy on the line. You want to be the best? This is your chance. And you've won a number of tournaments before, so you can win them again. For Resolution, there's a chance of redemption. He has not won a TI, and he lost in the finals. And losing in the finals of the biggest game of your career can really come to haunt you. A very good friend of mine was a hockey goalie, played in the state finals in his senior year of high school. Ended up losing in the finals by 1 goal. And you can blame a number of things. His first-line defenseman made some key errors that allowed the puck to be in like a 1v1 situation where it was a wing up against him in a 1v1, but he had failed to stop the winger in the 1v1. Goal was scored, puck in nets, and lost by 1. He's been haunted by that for the rest of his life. It's been like a decade. He's still haunted by that. He went on to play collegiate hockey. He played hockey for years longer. He's got his own life now, but that loss still hangs over his head like, man, what if I had won the big accomplishment? And if you're Rezo, I have to imagine it's a very similar thing, where you wonder, what if he had won TI? He was 1 series away from winning it. He ended up, I think it was 2 games away from winning that grand finals. Fortunately for him, didn't happen. He hasn't really been that close since. Well, this is the closest he's been since that. He has 2 series wins away from redeeming 6 years ago and saying, you know what, I am one of the very few, the very proud that can actually win TI, etch my name into the Aegis. That would be a career-topping achievement that I'm sure he would love to get. For Nisha, I mean, he'll be one of many of these, meteoric rising young players to become a TI champion. He wasn't necessarily as fast to win as a player like Sumail was, where Sumail jumped onto the scene and won TI 8 months later, but Nisha has had the reputation of being a top core player in Europe for years, one of the best in the world for years, and a great way to cement that is to win a TI. Suddenly, he's now in the conversation of being, the best mid player ever, considering he would have won a TI. He's been around for a few years, and his peak level is extraordinarily strong. For Zayats and for Crystallis, not as much in terms of legacy ramifications quite yet, but that's a good way to start building your all-time case as a player. You win a TI. And at that point, it's like, wow, a lot of money, a lot of prestige, and your name will be remembered for the rest of Dota 2 history. So, a lot of cool stuff there. For Tundra, again, Saksa is in a very similar situation. He was on the same team as Rezo. Everything that I said about Rezo in terms of losing that TI applies to Saksa, because he was there. Those two were together losing that TI against Wings in 2016, TI 6. And they know what it's like to be on the stage. Saksa's been around for a very, very long time. He's been on a number of very, very good teams. And this is his chance for redemption. For Snake King, it's a chance to, rewrite some of the narrative about his career. He was one of those guys where it's like, hey, can Snake King really win? He's been on all these teams, and he's been on good teams. He's been everywhere, but he's never really placed that well at any TIs. He's been these 9th places and these 13th places, and he never stayed around a team for too long. Snake King clearly has matured since his younger days. I mean, he's been the stalwart captain of this team. he's been around in being the veteran presence in this team, keeping it together. So for him, it would be a huge deal to say this is my redemption arc. This is the last arc of my career. I've won a TI. I went through the trials and the tribulations and the journeys from good teams to bad teams, and I've won my TI. And I'm sure for the Americans out there, they'd be very happy to see their one remaining representative actually win, because that could be the cope. Like, hey, Snakings from the USA, we did it, guys. And obviously, not the same, but it would still be nice to see Snake King win. It's in that sense for the region. For 33, who has had, in terms of eye test, some fantastic stuff. Statistically, some fantastic stuff. But there's something better than statistics in the eye test. And that's hardware. That's a trophy. That's an Aegis of the Immortal for TI11 Championship. Obviously, it'd be very nice to win. And for someone like Nine or for Skeeter, you almost do a little bit of rewriting in terms of what a player should be for these like great core players. A lot of these great core players are the sort of guys who you go from being a relative unknown to a top player overnight. And that's kind of been the trend of a lot of these players like, Miracle and Wii and Nisha and Sumail and Arteezy kind of jumped up from being these tier 3 / in-house / pub players to a tier 1 player. They were the hot prospect. You stick them on a top roster and they win. But Skeeter and Nine noticed like to kind of be on these relatively mediocre teams for years, like these tier 2.5 European teams for years. And they say, you know what? We bring it back to what used to be the way rosters used to be constructed. We used to see players grind up through the tier 2 scene and grind up through the tier 3 scene before being able to get these tier 1 shots. And Skeeter and Nine, I mean, this might be their really only one shot to ever be a tier 1 team going into these teams. And they sure as hell prove they belong. And that right there kind of starts to rewrite the narrative of what the journey for these top players should be. I actually really appreciate seeing these two guys get to where they were from where they started. So, obviously a lot on the line. For the Secret org particularly, Secret's been around TI for a long time. Been the favorite before, and winning TI kind of washes away the stench of, say, TI5 particularly. That's kind of one of those things where I'm actually going to make a video about TI5 Secret one day regarding exactly who they are, how they got to where they were, and how they crashed and burned so hard. But Secret's never won a TI as an organization. So to win it at long last would say, well, you can now officially shut up. We've won a TI. And you know what? If they win a TI, I will officially shut up. So that's what this means for the other two teams, the winners bracket teams for Tundra Esports and for Team Secret. I'm actually extremely excited for TI. It's an, as time recording, less than 24 hours from now, so should be great to see Liquid Aster, Secret Tundra, losers finals the next day, and of course grand finals. So yeah, should be fun to see. If you enjoyed the video, enjoy my stuff, I have got more on my YouTube channel. I have a Twitch, I have a Twitter. It's in the screen right now. It'll be in the description below. I will be back for some more Badgers briefings. I know there is a TI2 retrospective coming in soon. That's going to be a long video. But other than that, might make 1 or 2 more videos about the current TI11. Just given it's a really relevant current topic. It's the TI2 retrospective. It'll be there whenever it needs to be. I mean, this is decades old material. This is very current, so might have a more TI11 oriented video once we know who won the tournament. But yeah, as always, thank you for watching and have a great night.